talking about concepts like difference. You mention a very important concept, that is the concept of ideology. You also mentioned one very important word, and that is unstable nature of language. So if we try to just make sense of the entire discussion that we have had so far, we try to talk about deconstruction in linguistic terms. And there, one important thing that we learned was that deconstruction talks about the unstable nature of language. That is, language is a very slippery medium. So this is an interesting term. Language is a slippery medium. Language is a very unstable medium. And there we understood this concept of the slippery medium of language through two very useful concepts. One was the concept of trace, that is, we see that there is trace of words which have not been used, even in those words which are used. And so they contaminate the meaning of those words. Then we also talked about another important concept, related concept, that was the concept of difference. And here difference, you know that it basically subsumes two concepts. And what are those two concepts within difference? One is the concept of differ, that means you differ maybe with something. In other words, the concept of difference. And we have seen the differential nature of language in structuralism, where we say that, okay, one word is what it is because it is not all those other words. Either we talk about, say, good and evil, or red and black, or we talk about cat, bat, rat. That means either we talk about the, say, permutation of phonemes, change of phonemes in a word, in a signifier, or we think about those possible binary categories of meaning where we create those binary categories. So that was the idea of difference, that red is red because it is not bed, and red is red as a color because it is not black, it is not white, it is not so many other colors. So that is the idea of difference. And because of this idea of trace, because of this idea of difference, you always have, or because of the idea of unstable nature of language, you always have that kind of postponement of meaning. That means that kind of that kind of difference of meaning. I'm sorry, that kind of deferment of meaning, or deferral of meaning. These are two words which come from which come from the word defer, defer. We say that the meeting has been deferred, the item has been deferred. So from deferred, you have the word deferral, or you have the word deferment. So there is constant postponement of meaning, and there is also that idea of difference, and the two concepts are subsumed in one word that Derrida used to suggest the nature of these two concepts, difference and deferral, by the word difference. So that was the linguistic aspect. And here in linguistic aspect of deconstruction, we learned that meaning is very unstable, or meaning is slippery, or language becomes a very indeterminate kind of entity. So these words we learned, that language is indeterminate, that language is slippery, that language is unstable. Now we further can make use of this word unstable when we talk about the philosophical dimension of deconstruction, right? Philosophical dimension, and where we talk about our existence in the world. Now, our existence in the world, here it has no center, that is Derrida's view. In other words, when Derrida talked about the concept of logocentrism, which is a dominant practice in Western philosophy, where a certain knowledge system, or all knowledge systems, or all possible realms of knowledge, they center on some concept, and somehow that concept appears above the play of differences. That means we talk about all possible concepts which are not pure. That means if we think about good, if we think about man, if man and woman, good and evil, objective, subjective, okay, right, outside, inside, all possible concepts, all possible binary terms. So we learn from there that our knowledge systems have always tried to make one particular center around which all knowledge moves. And that center can be man, that center can be God, that center can be democracy, that center can be another idea. In other words, we see that all possible discourses, they in fact take this center as the point of origin. But somehow this center remains above the play of signifiers. That means it remains pure. Now Derrida attacks this notion that there is nothing called pure. On the other hand, when we try to see those categories, say good and evil or man or woman and so on, we will see that in all such cases, there is a kind of hierarchy of terms where one particular term in that pair becomes important. And he also talks about this practice in Western knowledge systems. And what is this practice known as? Logocentrism, where we think about one particular concept, a sense, and we put it at the center of everything. So from this concept of center, Derrida tries to decenter that idea. So, in other words, when after deconstruction we say that we live in a decentered world, then we don't have one single concept dictating all possible meanings, but rather you have different opinions, you have different discourses, and discourse is a word which I want to introduce at this point. So you can have the discourse of environmentalism, you can have the discourse of Christian missionaries, you can have the discourse of democracy, you can have the discourse of conservatism, and so on. So, and another point that we learned was that we cannot make a very neat kind of categorization of those concepts where one concept appears in its pure form, uncontaminated by another concept. Because all concepts are shot through the traces of all other concepts. You can see the trace of one concept in the other concept. Third important dimension of deconstruction that we discussed was the role of ideologies. And here it is not a separate category, but rather it is simply this point that when human identity, my identity, your identity, everyone's identity, when human identity is made of languages, there is nothing outside the text. When human identity is made of all those texts and language is full of the operation of different kinds of ideologies, social ideologies, political ideologies. So, in other words, what human identity is made of, it is made of that kind of, say, fusion of different ideologies. And you can see the role of ideologies in the formation of human identity. So, this way, we learn that deconstruction will enable you to talk about those ideologies. That ideology can be the ideology of race, of gender, of class, of region, or so many other categories where you can see the role of a particular ideology. When somebody speaks Urdu and maybe makes a few mistakes, we don't bother. But if somebody speaks English and makes a few mistakes, probably we are less forgiving. Here also you can see the role of ideology. Here also we can see the role of ideology. Similarly, when you choose a particular color over another color, or you choose a particular dress over another dress, if you say study that point deeper, you'll find that there also is the use of functioning of some kind of ideology. And so from deconstruction, we have learned these lessons, that language is unstable, human existence is unstable, and human identity is also unstable. In other words, our self also consists of, say, so many kaleidoscopes. In other words, so many different kinds of ideologies which can be seen in human identity in its formation. I hope we are clear about these three important aspects of deconstruction. Right. Now let us think about some definitions of deconstruction, which we can understand better now. There is one definition of deconstruction, that deconstruction is not destruction. Deconstruction is not destruction. So please do not consider the two terms as synonymous. They are not. But deconstruction possibly has the sense of the original meaning of the word analysis. Analysis. You know the word analysis, but the word analysis also has a history of its roots, also has its etymology. Etymology, when you say that it is etymologically speaking, you talk in terms of the root of a particular word. So in etymological terms, analysis meant to undo. To undo. When you use your laptop, when you type something, there also you undo something. And you also use this expression, oh, you'll undo everything. Whatever I have done. And in these days, we can use the kind of domestic, say, image where lots of people are working from home and they are also doing, say, the household work. And so you sweep your floor, you mop your floor, and then somebody just somehow uh, breaks a glass, and the glass is full of milk. And so you are really undoing what I have done, right? So deconstruction, in literal terms, it means to undo, right? Because this word will give us some kind of clue. Then we can further talk about deconstruction, and we can say that deconstruction actually tries to tease out certain categories in a text. Tease out. And so a text will betray itself. That means there is a kind of plurality of significance. So that element of plurality, something plural meaning, or that element of plurality is very much an aspect of a text. Now this plurality of significance is the concern of deconstruction. And so what is its assumption? Its assumption is that the text is saying something which is quite different from what it intended to say. Or in other words, it says something quite different from what it appears to be saying. And here we can have a very simple kind of analysis of any film. A text is saying something, right? But what is this? It is saying something quite different from what it appears to be saying. So it appears to be saying something. Suppose it appears to be talking about a very important role that love plays in human life. Okay, it appears to be saying this, but actually it says something entirely different. And there you see that love does not play any important role. That means there is that point of contradiction. What the text say is saying and what it appears to be saying. What it says and what it appears to say. That contradiction is there. Now we are learning some more words. And these words are contradictions. And these words are absences. These words are gaps. These words are points of double bind in a text. Double bind. B-I-N-D. Now what am I saying? Deconstruction has this assumption that a text cannot say something that it intends to say because of the unstable nature of language, and also because of the role of ideology. When a writer is writing something, the writer is operating in a particular context where he is made of all those social ideologies which exist in his time. Similarly, when I am reading a text as a reader, I am also made of many of those ideologies. And so a text always presents some points where you can say that these are the gaps in a text, that these are the absences in a text. That means for a deconstructive reading, often what the text does not say, that also becomes very important. What the text does not say. I wrote, say, a short write-up on My Name is Khan, that is Shah Rukh Khan's film. And if you see that film and if you are within the universe of that film, there are lots of things. But there is another point also about that film. The point is that the text is talking about, say, American soldiers dying, and it also shows an American family, and where, say, say a journalist loses, say, his friend or somebody, and then immediately after that moment there is that song, we shall overcome, we shall overcome, which is a kind of morale booster. And if you are, say, if you are part of the emotional universe of that film, you obviously feel for those soldiers. But there is also a point of gap in that absence also. And what is that absence? That there are deaths, or there are, say, scenes of devastation in many of those areas also, say whether it is Afghanistan or Iraq. So that means that is a kind of gap which you can discover in the text. And similarly, I can give you another example from a text. So the novel Kite Runner is a very famous novel. But if you read Kite Runner closely, and if you think about the role of ideology in Kite Runner, you'll find that all through the text, it is presenting United States of America as the land of opportunity, as the land where all people fleeing torture, persecution, problems, they can go, and America is the land of opportunity. And so there is a very blatant celebration of American values, right? But again, the text, what it say says, what it says and what it does not say, these are two different things. And so you can say that a text can be read as saying something quite different from what it appears to be saying. We can talk about many other texts also. And that's why I'm saying that deconstructive criticism works well with Marxism, with feminist theory, with post-colonial criticism, and so on. Because if you see feminism, Marxism, then deconstruction provides this basic textual operation, and they use this operation in their discourses. So here we were talking about deconstruction, and we see that deconstruction is like analysis, and here analysis is taken in terms of its etymology, where it means to undo. And further, deconstruction also talks about teasing of all those categories in a text, right? And deconstruction is not destruction. Rather, it assumes this idea that a text already has some points where it probably betrays itself, its real self. So what happens in a deconstructive reading? The critic focuses on those points of contradictions. The critic focuses on those gaps, on those absences, on those points. And there is another word that we can learn, symptomatic points, or deconstruction offers a kind of symptomatic reading, right? And there is a term now which we can introduce. It's the right time to introduce that term. The term is that deconstruction believes in a kind of reading which focuses on contradictions. So this is a kind of reading which focuses on contradictions. And the term that I wanted to use was aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A, aporia, aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A. Aporia is that point in a text where one cannot make up one's mind which meaning is correct. So there are two meanings which are equally correct, two meanings which are equally valid, and which meaning to accept and which meaning to leave out, that is the point of aporia in a text. That is the point of stalemate. We are using a term from chess. That is the point of stalemate in a text. Now we can probably compare deconstruction with another theory, another position, which was the dominant position in criticism and which is still used. And what is that position? What is that school? That school is called new criticism. So all of you have read something about new criticism. At least you must be familiar with this term new criticism, because new criticism was the dominant critical practice in the United States of America, in English speaking world. And you think about some critics like Ellen Tate, and you also think about some other critics like say Emerson, right? And many of those critics who were also writing under the influence of new criticism. So let us just recall our understanding of new criticism. One basic idea in new criticism was, one basic assumption in new criticism was that texts have an element of unity. Texts are unified wholes. Texts are unified wholes. That means the idea of unity is so important in a text that if it has to be a text, if it has to be a literary work, it must have that element of unity. If there is no unity, it is not a literary work. It ceases to be literary if it does not have that element of unity. That means when a critic reads a poem and A critic, the critic attends to different sounds in a poem, different kinds of devices in a poem, or the element of tension in a poem between two ideas or two forces, or the texture of words, or points where you can see there is ambiguous meaning in a text. And you know that, say, Emerson wrote a book titled Seven Types of Ambiguities. So, seven types of ambiguities. So, that means ambiguity is an important quality feature of a text. And the critic will look for those points where that ambiguity is there in a text. The critic will look for those points where different images are used. And you know that image is also something very important in a poem. The critic will look at a point where there is the use of paradox. Clinch Brooks, one very important critic belonging to this school, he called poetry the language of paradox. And paradox here is related to the concept of irony. So if we think about these key words which are part of our vocabulary now, you say that a poem uses this paradox. A poem uses this, there is this use of irony in this poem. Or we say that these are the images which are used in the poem. Or we say that this is the rhyme scheme in the poem. Or we say that this is the device of alliteration in the poem. Or we talk about all kinds of literary devices in a poem, and all those devices, images, metaphors, paradoxical expressions, case uses of irony, element of tension, all these things, all these elements may appear, say, separate, or we can use a better word, disparate elements in a poem. But new critical reading will try to see all those different elements, all those disparate elements contributing to this overarching idea of unity. So the text has unity, and all these elements may appear to go in different directions. But if we look at all those elements, we can possibly fuse them together and we can see that the text is a unified whole, because all those elements ultimately contribute to the idea of unity in that text. So the idea of unity is so important in new criticism. And usually when we watch any film, or when we watch say a serial, or when we read a book, our practice of reading is so much influenced by this idea of reading, that we consider those words sacred, we consider a text always complete, we always say look at a text with some respect, that okay, it must have this unity, it must have all these points. And so interesting thing is that in contemporary literary theory, the reader, the innocent reader who always considered those texts unified wholes, that innocent reader has died. And so no reader is considered innocent. No reader is considered innocent. Even when readers read their texts along those lines, now criticism is showing that, oh, they were also very much part of a certain ideology. And even new critical enterprise was itself a form of ideology. So from new criticism, we learn this idea of unity, which has influenced the entire course of English studies. Even today, when we read literary texts. And by the way, Post-structuralist theory uses the word text. So often you can say that the journey from literary work to text is also the journey from, say, an older position to a newer position, from literary work to text, because the word text suggests that idea of labyrinth. The word text suggests that idea of texture. And if you look at the etymological, say, root of this word text, it comes from the word texture, to embroider something. Interesting, to embroider something. And when you embroider something, you have many of those threads, many of those threads. So now we are ready to understand the concept of contradiction. But for deconstructive theory, nothing like the idea of unity, but rather a text consists of different kinds of contradictions. There are gaps in a text, there are absences in a text, and the job of a critic is to look for all those points of contradictions in a text and to show that, oh, the text is saying this, seems to be saying this, but it is saying this, or it is saying this also. And so any reading actually in deconstructive theory becomes a misreading, because if as a critic I read a text in a particular manner, showing contradictions, showing those points of gaps, showing those points of contradictions, but my own work is also my work. I was a reader, I am also made of those ideologies, I am also following language which is a kind of unstable medium, and I also end up saying something which I did not intend to say. And so all readings become misreadings. So critic A reads a work and that becomes misreading. But another critic reads this critic A and that also becomes a misreading. And so there is this endless process of misreadings. And misreading is also one important concept that we are learning, because Paul Dewan, a very important American critic who used deconstruction in his analysis of different texts, the word misreading is used to talk about his kind of criticism. Finally, we can say that deconstruction introduces a very different kind of criticism, which looks at this idea of logocentrism, which tries to unearth the role of ideologies in a text, which tries to show the unstable nature of language, which tries to show the unstable nature of human identity. And when it reads text, it tries to show that the meaning in a text is not stable. So that means this idea of something not being stable is also transferred to the reading of text, right? So we learned these concepts. Misreading, or reading which focuses on contradictions, or reading which pays attention to those points of aporia, stalemate, double bind, right? Tomorrow also we'll continue our discussion, and I want to discuss one particular essay by M.H. Abraham, which was a very popular essay. I'll discuss that essay. If possible, try to read that essay. That is very much on the reading list that has been given to you. And there is another essay by Hillis Miller. That essay is a very interesting example of deconstructive criticism. But again, that kind of deconstructive criticism which focuses on language, slippery nature of language, right? Now you can say something, unmute yourself. Recording stop.